Okay, we'll make a start. Good afternoon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on protecting your company from B2B payments fraud and emerging threats posed to organizations in the digital age. My name is Mus Hussein, and I'm part of the executive leadership team here at nsKnox, where I head up UK and Europe. So quickly to fly through today's agenda. We're going to make a quick introduction to the company. So who are nsKnox and what do we do? We'll talk a little bit about the challenges in the market today with regards to payments fraud. 6 must-haves, and this is not a definitive list, of course, but must-haves that we would suggest companies can implement to protect themselves against payments fraud. What we ourselves do at nsKnox in terms of our solution, and of course, some time for Q&A. Now, before I move on, just note some quick housekeeping items. I will pause at intervals during the webinar to take questions. If you do have any questions, please click on the raise hand icon and submit your question on the Q&A panel. I'll also make time for questions at the end of the presentation. Again, please use the Q&A panel to submit these, and I will review at the end of my slides and talk through the questions and answers at the end. You should find your raise hand, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you should find it in the panel where you have joined. There'll be a control panel where you can click raise hand. That will alert me to your attention, and as I say, I'll ensure then I can answer your question as part of the Q&A. Thank you. So without further ado, let's move on into the meat of the presentation today. A little bit about us. Firstly, we're a company founded in 2016. We are a cybersecurity fintech. We're headed up by Alan Cohen, the gentleman here on the left-hand side, who's also the founder and former CEO and chairman of CyberArk, who are one of the largest NASDAQ-listed cybersecurity companies in the world and considered to be industry thought leaders. Now, our unique technology, together with a highly experienced executive team, has attracted prestigious investors such as Viola Ventures, who are one of the largest VCs in Israel, IDB, who are one of the largest banks in Israel, and of course, Microsoft need no introductions. So we're very privileged to have such prestigious investors helping to push our company forward. So businesses are spending many millions of dollars on the emerging threats of the digital age, problems exacerbated by a globally connected world where data is king. This continually evolving landscape has exposed businesses and consumers to a reality of being constantly under attack from a new generation of criminals who are more organized and better equipped to seize on opportunities created by the technology revolution. To this end, we are seeing that organizations are constantly battling cyber fraud attacks on their payments. We're going to talk to you a little bit now about what that means in terms of the industry. How big is this problem? Simply put, and in the words of Wells Fargo Bank, payments fraud is still your company's most powerful threat. This is not a matter of an occasional incident. There are thousands and thousands of cases of payments fraud every single month. It is a growing global pandemic. A report from the Association of Financial Professionals that you'll see on your screen here states that 82% of businesses reported payments fraud attacks in 2018. And when you consider that, according to the ACFE, that is the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, up to 5% of that revenue could be lost to payments fraud, it's easy to understand why cyber-enabled crime is such a massive issue and why businesses remain such a lucrative target for criminals. Global reports and statistics point to some very quite eye-watering financial losses to businesses and industry. The FBI themselves, as you can see here, have reported over $12 billion lost to business email compromise alone in the last 5 years. So some quite staggering numbers. It's increasingly clear that these attacks do not just impact the bottom line, but too often result in a loss of jobs and damage to a company's brand and reputation. So some very significant indicators in the market of how large a problem this is for businesses, particularly corporates. But unfortunately, we're seeing these kinds of attacks aimed at both the larger enterprises, but increasingly SMEs and medium-sized businesses as well. I'm now going to run you through a couple of case studies to give you some real-world examples of where we're seeing these problems occur and what they can do to businesses. So some of the largest and most well-protected companies in the world, including Facebook and Google, have fallen victim to payments fraud. Our first case here that you see on your page involved Google and Facebook themselves. A fraudster used some very sophisticated social engineering techniques to pose as a CEO of a technology supplier. And in doing so, committed vendor impersonation and CEO impersonation frauds. And this is a feat of fairly simple social engineering, fooling financial operators in these companies into wiring payments in excess of $100 million. In fact, we believe the figure is close to $120 million to his company over a period of 2 years. So some very, very significant numbers, as I say, and social engineering in this case, CEO impersonation and vendor impersonation being very significant to Google and Facebook. Our second case is with ABB, a large multinational corporate, and follows a very worrying trend in the surge of occupational, or also known as employee fraud. In this case, an ABB executive responsible for ethics, integrity, and training in the company, no less. So an individual implicitly trusted not only by their position in the company as an executive, but also by virtue of their role, which is, of course, all about integrity and ethics, abused his position and was able to commit fraud of over $103 million. So again, some very significant numbers, and unfortunately, nobody likes to hear details of executives or employees committing fraud within a company, but it is a stark reality that we have to face up to. For many companies and executives, this is an understandably uncomfortable truth, of course, that your greatest asset, your trusted staff and executives, are also a key vulnerability potentially, but also occasionally a threat. Now, by their nature, social engineering and employee fraud rank as some of the hardest to detect because they're not necessarily things you can find with technology alone. People, by their nature, have vulnerabilities, emotional switches that can be played upon, and this is exactly what the criminals and fraudsters expect to use. It proves that even for companies like Google, with all of their financial power, their technological advances, and no doubt many millions invested into their protection, payments fraud is a very significant issue. So the natural question is just how exposed are other businesses and yourselves and other corporates to this escalating risk? We've covered 2 examples and types of fraud, but there are many. Here are some further examples of the methods used by fraudsters every day, hurting people and businesses alike, including the most prevalent types of fraud in our experience: email account compromise and business email compromise. We could broadly classify these types of attacks into 3 categories. IT infrastructure attacks, what you might typically expect many media to refer to as cyber attacks, but social engineering and insider threats, of course, as we've just covered in those 2 real-world examples. However, as we can see, the attack vectors are many. Critically, they're developing in a range and sophistication that many businesses cannot keep pace with. Cyber criminals are now a highly advanced setup, pursuing their objectives clinically and ruthlessly. Often, the perpetrators are part of a highly organized business unit, run with the efficiency you would expect of a legitimate business. It's quite scary stuff. Now, before I move on into what we consider to be some of the must-haves of a corporate payments control system, I'm just going to pause for a moment and allow the attendees to ask any questions. So please feel free at this point to raise your hand on the Zoom control panel. And if you do have a question and I see any hands raised, I'll pause while you submit that question for me to respond to. Thank you. I'll just give that a few seconds. Okay, there are no hands raised. Hopefully the messages that we've discussed resonate in terms of the problems that you can see in the market yourselves as business leaders and parts of large organizations. But I'll continue, of course, and there'll be other opportunities to ask questions. So please feel free to have a think about that in the meantime. So we've discussed and outlined the challenges that companies face. What can we do to help better protect ourselves? There are a number of both high-tech and low-tech methods that can be used to protect your company. We know most companies have processes and controls in place, of course, to protect their businesses. But no doubt there are many more steps that can be taken towards better safeguarding themselves against cyber fraud. On the following slides, we're going to touch on what we've described as 6 must-haves, or put another way, the requirements of modern system of payments, protection, and controls. In short, what can you do to immediately reduce and mitigate your exposure to cyber fraud risks? Now, these are not in any particular order, but I'll run through these from 1 through to 6, of course. Number 1 for us is ensuring that payment security is on the CISO's priority list. Now, CISOs, or Chief Information Security Officers, are traditionally trained and focused on protecting data, protecting networks, user credentials, and these are all very critical items, of course, and will need to be maintained and kept protected at all times. However, there is an expanding requirement in their remit for them to additionally solve the challenges in protecting the bloodstream of the enterprise, your money. Now, referencing our earlier Wells Fargo quote, if payments fraud is your company's most powerful threat, then shouldn't it be natural for a priority of the security officers to be payments fraud and security? I think that's a natural conclusion. It certainly is from our perspective. Now, it's our belief that in the era of digital financing, procurement, and payments, the risks of cyber fraud, both internal and external, are enormous. It's of paramount importance that CISOs are aware and actively involved in building the right infrastructure and methodology for the detection and prevention of cyber fraud attempts. Moving on to number 2 now, just as the banking industry have learned to never trust any information received via any communication medium without authentication and verification, we are advising companies to apply cyber-grade verification to all of their communications, particularly in regards to payments. Email and verbal discussions over the phone are very insecure in nature, of course. In general, you never know who you are really communicating with. You may have seen social media and news reports demonstrating how famous figures recently were imitated by a technology referred to as deepfake. It really is a stuff of nightmares. If you can imagine the scenarios that can be used to manipulate individuals, some would argue sometimes for fun, but of course we know that it can be far more nefarious purposes. It's further proof of the need to deploy technology to fight technology abuse. Now, there are many instances of this occurring, of course. Things as simple and readily available as Photoshop can be used to alter images, alter invoices, alter checks, bank account verification details. There are many instances of information that is used to help verify a particular company or individual, which can be photoshopped or otherwise forged. So, as I say, we're very much about advocating a state-of-the-art authentication and verification system. There are many types of alternatives and approaches you can take. But as we say, this is really all about using technology best practices to help your organization. Moving on to our next control, it's a comprehensive and enforceable list of payment policies, particularly when requests don't are called, automatically routed for explicit approval. Now, what does that mean? Automated enforcement of payment policies is a key control requirement. A quick example might be where a vendor has, for example, an annual contract value of £50,000, but is about to be sent a payment for £500,000. Now, is that simply a mistake? Did someone accidentally add a 0 to the number? Or perhaps an indication of fraud taking place? Financial controllers would want this kind of detail to be picked up by their payment security systems, both for protection against fraudulent behavior, but also as a safeguard against genuine mistakes. So this is a very simple but powerful policy where your technology can help prevent these issues, as well as many other loopholes or vulnerabilities that can be used for fraud in a similar vein. Our fourth control is about centralized independent controls for all payments related processes. Now, the most effective way to prevent an insider fraud is to make all control systems and processes external and independent. That is to say, individuals with privileged access, be they company executives, financial operators, or technology administrators, can't illegitimately use or abuse their authority to bypass these control systems. An example of this might be that if a company's policy is to enforce multiple steps of approval for high-value payments, then your CEO or another company executives shouldn't be able to override that process with some form of super access or authority, because you're now breaking the very control you put in place to safeguard against various types of abuse or social engineering. Now, having an external independent process would also further bolster your defenses against outsider fraud, as attackers now will not only have to overcome internal security systems, but your processes, which have been externalized to those independent protectors, of course. So again, a very relatively simple one, we think, but it's very important to separate those controls outside of your organization. Somewhat related to that is prohibiting out-of-band payments at all levels. So no payment should be allowed to bypass the incumbent control mechanisms, regardless of how urgent the payment is, how small, or how confidential it is. Now, why those particular measures? These are very specifically the measures that we often see fraudsters using. This is an urgent payment. So they want to inject urgency into the, and use emotions to financially manipulate your operators to make mistakes. Or they might say, hey, look, it's only £1,000. You're making payments of £1 million to me every day. It's not an issue. Whatever it may be, they're using these vulnerabilities and emotional pressure points to manipulate your organization into making mistakes. We've spoken about some of the CEO frauds that have taken place. These are very similarly exploiting these loopholes in order to mislead someone from within the enterprise to unknowingly transfer money to the wrong person because they're bypassing their existing control processes. So again, a relatively simple control, but something we believe can be very powerful in helping to protect your organization. Now, finally, one of the controls that we see is something which is often failing within, unfortunately, within large companies, but many companies in general, is that there are single points of failure dotted throughout the enterprise. Now, often, particularly as a technologist, I would maybe refer to this as a technological point of failure, a single point of failure, but actually, we also want to cover people as well in this game. So we want to ensure that we never allow any single person in any role to become a single point of failure. An example of this might be that if you require 5 executives to approve a payment transaction, but then once approved, that transaction is on a database somewhere with a database administrator having singular access to make changes to those details, then you have a single point of failure. Not only is that individual a single point of failure because they could be potentially manipulated themselves into making mistakes, but also to conduct insider threat of fraud. But also in the database itself, that database should be externalized and protected in a way that ensures the integrity of the information once the payment transaction or the payment instruction has been passed. So in this instance, as I say, you have a point of failure both on the technology and on the individual. But the key point we want to press here is the single points of failure across your business must be eradicated. But there's an amount of work involved in identifying what those are and making sure they are removed from a perspective of creating vulnerabilities in your business. Now, I've shot through those 6 control requirements in relatively quick order. It may be quite a lot of taking. I want to pause again just for a moment to give you guys the opportunity to ask me any questions. So again, please feel free, if at this point you have any questions, use the control panel you have on Zoom to raise your hand. And if you do that in the next 30 seconds or so, please, I'll be able to see you raising your hand and then afford you the opportunity to submit a question through the Q&A panel. Okay, I don't think we have any questions at this point, so I'll press on. Thank you. Now, at nsKnox, we've distilled many of the vulnerabilities we've spoken about and other requirements of a payment security system into focused areas of vulnerability. In this case, supply management and payments. These are all susceptible to various types of social engineering, as we've covered, and also IT infrastructure attacks. These are what we would consider to be particularly vulnerable areas, which are open to the types of attacks we've discussed. And so we'll talk you through now some of the areas that we think you can work on, and also potentially through our system and how you can protect yourself. Before we do that, in our experience, the fraud managers, CFOs, CISOs, payments and risk operations managers, and others who hold responsibility for payment security in their organizations could be concerned with and asking themselves questions such as assuring that their employees do not fall victim to a social engineering scam, that they are confident always in the integrity of their data and their finance and ops systems. And I think also very, very critically, of course, is in ensuring that the payments you are making are going to the intended recipient, to the right supplier and right bank account. These talk to the areas of vulnerability that we believe are imperative to protect. So these 3 points of vulnerability broadly are protecting people and processes from being subverted, corrupted, or compromised. Social engineering being the most common way to do this. protect systems and data from being manipulated, to provide confidence in the integrity of your payments throughout the transaction journey. And of course, verification of the identity of your payee or your beneficiary, their company and their account. So 3 points of vulnerability. Now again, at nsKnox, we've developed what we believe to be a weaponized ability to protect financial data, payments, and processes against being exploited by cyber fraud attacks. We've utilized advanced cyber defense methodologies and technology to protect companies against payments fraud. So if we go back and reference our 3 areas of vulnerability, we have developed 3 pillars of protection. The verification of the suppliers and vendors, also known as payees, of course, protecting payments processes and procedures and automating controls, and protecting your payments and accounting financial data. Now, this protective barrier wrapped around the supplier management and payments process that you can see on your screens is our pioneering data protection platform. It's called Cooperative Cybersecurity. This is what the protected by CCS envelope here means. So what is CCS and how does it work? CCS, or Cooperative Cybersecurity, is the foundational protection for protecting your payments, accounting, and financial data. Now, in this scheme on my presentation, imagine you are the corporate at the bottom of the screen, and you have some financial information. Now, imagine that there are 4 independent, robustly protected companies working together to protect your data. In this case, IDB Bank, nsKnox, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft. Each of these companies is given a cryptographically shredded and distributed piece of your information. Each piece that they're given means absolutely nothing to any of them. They're blind to the information that they're protecting. The important point here is to breach this data security network, a hacker would need to simultaneously and successfully breach each of these protectors in real time, and then to reconstruct the data using nsKnox's proprietary algorithms without being detected. It's a practical impossibility to do this. A great quote from our CEO here, where we had some press coverage from the BBC. The important thing really is that this data security mechanism and platform is a critical element of the service, because we can now operate with complete confidence in the integrity of the information that we will be capturing and storing for suppliers, their banking details, and your payments. That integrity is the bedrock of how you can continue to protect your processes and your people from information corruption and compromise down the chain. Now, if we move to our second point of vulnerability, we spoke about the verification of suppliers and vendors, and we have something we call the Global Pay Database. Now, the Global Pay Database gives you solid confirmation of payee. It protects against all of the forms of social engineering and other attacks that we've spoken about, including, of course, the most prevalent being business email compromise. This functionality enables a verification of your payee and their account. It is a global directory of verified businesses, their legal identifiers and banking information, and it's externalized on our data security platform, Cooperative Cybersecurity. So protected information whilst providing assurances that the companies you are paying are actually who they say they are. So a couple of quick screenshots about how this works in reality. Imagine here that you're wanting to search for an organization you're working with, in this case called Apple. We then give you some confirmation that we know the organization, and you want to enter their account number that they've given you for their supplier payments. You're then presented back with information that says we've linked this company back with the account number provided, and we've conducted what we call standard validation on that account. Now, we use multiple sources of data to help authenticate these businesses, including data directly from the corporate or client, yourselves, from their suppliers, from external sources that we tap into, and uniquely crowdsourced intelligence. As you can see on your screens, we offer levels of validation to give you a scale of assurance. Crowdsourced validation, as you'll see in the middle of the screen there, it uses data which is privately contributed by a network of customers and suppliers. Standard validation leverages data sources and micropayments to validate and correlate suppliers to their accounts. And extended validation gives you a banking grade, so a tier 1 banking grade, know your supplier verification, and it's performed in conjunction with a top 4 auditing firm. To address the third and final vulnerability, we have transaction authority, protecting the payments process, procedures, and automating controls. Using the Global Pay Database as a source of vendor verification, We protect the payment instructions by scanning each payment instruction on your side, on the client side, essentially pre-processing and cleansing those payment instructions of fraud before they reach the bank. We also ensure any exceptions to payment policies and changes to your supplier database require verification. So no changes can occur to your supplier's account details, for example, or your supplier's legal entity information without that being controlled in an automated fashion by our system. And the same thing happens with your payment runs and your corporate payment policies. Now, this is a quick example of what happens when you send your payment run through our system. In this case, if you've sent a payment in that is going to a beneficiary, as you can see on your screens, a beneficiary called Bondi & Sons, that beneficiary has either been not found to be authorized for your company, or worse, could be found to be fraudulent. But in any event, you'll get a rejection in real time with some information and some threat intelligence as to why that would be rejected. It's a very, very quick screenshot and gives you a flavor of what our platform does. As I said, it protects your suppliers, your payments, and your processes, ensures that you remove no single points of failure that we've spoken about through our presentation. Now, we're nearing the end now. I just want to give you a quick wrap up. At nsKnox, we've developed our technology in the belief that companies are unable to adequately protect themselves whilst remaining reliant upon a singular protective mechanism. When it comes to cybersecurity, the advisable stance to take is one of caution and conservatism. Assume that your company will be breached, and you will be better prepared to not only protect yourself proactively, but also in limiting any potential damage. This is why we are laser focused on preventing the monetization of a cyber attack. That is to say, if we assume that the ultimate goal of an attack is criminal financial gain, which is, by the way, by far the most common objective, then efforts should be concentrated on how you can stop a technology breach from turning into a financial loss. For many large companies, financial loss is materially damaging, of course, but hopefully something from which you can recover. Equally important, and in some industries, I think it's arguable that it's even more important, is the damage to your corporate reputation and the lasting implications this can have on your customer confidence. So at nsKnox, we not only protect your money, we also help protect your corporate reputation with our cutting edge technology. We have reached the end of our session today. I hope that you found the webinar informative. It's been my pleasure to host you this afternoon. At this point, I would like to open up the session to any questions that our audience has. And we have a little bit of time on our side, so please take a couple of minutes, grab a quick drink of water if needed. I know I certainly will be. I'll just give our audience 2 minutes to submit any questions through the Q&A panel that you'll see in your control panel on Zoom. Or if you prefer, please feel free to raise your hand on the control panel and I'll be able to respond to your questions directly. So I'll just give you guys a minute or two now to consider any questions you have, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, no questions as yet. I'll just give this another few seconds. Okay, we have a raised hand. But just to protect your own identity, thank you for that. Just please feel free to submit a question through the Q&A panel. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. Okay, so we have a question which is, how is our product priced? Thank you for that question. It's actually very simple. We are an early venture company. We believe to be very competitively priced. We price on an annual subscription, and it's a very simple, at this moment in time, a very simple flat fee structure. So it's something which you can enter with absolute certainty about what the cost to your company will be over the course of a year, or 2 years, or 3 years. I'm happy to speak to you offline. I'll give you my email address and details in a second, and you can feel free to reach out to me separately. But as I say, it's a very simple annual subscription pricing, and it's, we believe, to be very competitive. Thank you. Okay, do we have any other questions at all? Okay, we've only, I think we've, I don't think we're going to get any other questions. At this point, I'd just like to thank you again for making time in your very busy schedules to join us. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. You can reach us on contact@nsKnox.net, or you can reach me directly. You should have had my email address through the invitations, but it's mus@nsknox.net. We'll, of course, be very happy to answer any additional questions you have offline and to talk to you about how you can help protect your company against payments fraud. Thank you very much again for your interest today and for attending, and I wish you a great week ahead. Thanks, everyone.